It was 1981. I was in love with Mary Frances. She and her son Nolan had been out sailing on a beautiful summer's day on Lake Washington in southern Minnesota. They'd had a terrific day, and on their way home, they were involved in a horrific car accident, and Mary Fran was killed outright. Nolan, who had just turned 7, had sustained a mortal head wound that took him 6 days to make his transition. Luckily, we were in southern Minnesota, and we were really close to the Mayo Health Systems, and both Mary Fran and Nolan were taken to St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, Minnesota, where they got terrific care. The people there were just amazing, wonderful. Well, I tell you this because in the 6 days that it took from the accident to when Nolan made his final transition, that was time for a lot of people, a lot of family and friends to gather and be with Nolan, hold vigil with him, and support him. Well, the key to all this is that Mary Fran was one of 9 kids, and that meant that there were lots of boyfriends and girlfriends, husbands and wives, aunts and uncles, grandparents, friends, and that's just her side of the family. And then there's my side of the family. So there was a lot of us that had been gathered there to lend support to Nolan. So, because there were so many, what we decided to do is just kind of divvy it up, because Nolan was in a rather small room, and there's a bed and then all this monitoring gear that was around him. So we divvied it up. There were 2 people per 2 hours, and we go in and just be with him. Well, as it turns out, my shift was with Jannie, Mary Fran's oldest sister, and we had the shift between 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. on the morning of the 6th day. So we went in, and I happened to have Nolan's favorite storybook, and we read him stories, and then we told him about the funny things that his uncles had done. And as it turns out, just that night, they had gone on an expedition where the uncles went throughout the Mayo Health System and swiped the cushions off the couches that were in the waiting room so that they could put them on the floor of the waiting room, and it was more comfortable as they were waiting and lying and trying to catch a little bit of sleep. So we were there for the 2 hours, and we told Nolan stories about the friends and relatives, and just generally tried to engage him. Nolan was in a coma. He had never regained consciousness since the accident, but one of the things that the nurses had told us was that hearing is the last sense to go. And so it was important that we talked to him and let him know that we were there to support him. Well, it gets to be about 4:45 in the morning, and Jannie, who is a trained nurse in trauma care, goes to the end of the bed, and she looks at his chart, and she looks at all of all these monitors, and with tears in her eyes, she holds her hand out to me and says, "Scott, it's time." So we pulled up a couple of chairs next to Nolan's head, and we sat down with him and told him that he had been a really brave boy, and that he had struggled so hard to be with us, and he was struggling to stay alive, and that was wonderful. And we were so proud of him for all of the effort that he had been doing to stay with us. But then Jannie said, Nolan, if your mom comes, and remembering Mary Fran died at the accident scene 6 days before, if your mother comes and she would like you to go with her, that would be good that would be what you should do. You should listen to your mom. And if she invites you, then you should go with your mother. And we had a chance then to tell him one more time how much we loved him, how much we cared for him, and how proud we were. And then it was 5 o'clock, and it was our turn to leave, and another shift came in. Well, it wasn't more than 45 minutes later when a nurse came into the waiting room where we were all scattered about higgledy-piggledy on the sofas and on the floor, and she woke us up and said, it's getting close, it's getting time. So we all got up and we, filed into Nolan's hospital room. And as luck would have it, by the time I got into the room, I was one of the last ones. It was already, 3-4 deep around the bed. And I thought to myself, well, that's just silly. So I wound up just going over and sitting on the windowsill next to Mary Fran's youngest brother, Willie. And we just sat there and watched. And really the only thing that was going on was you could watch the heart monitor, where it bounces and, does this. And it was slowing down, and it became quieter and quieter. And eventually it just flatlined. And when Nolan's heart quit and he was flatlined, what I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil and coming up to her son and scooping him out of his physical body. And they had this most exquisite reunion, as you could only imagine, between a mother and son. And they were there, and what surprised me was that I got to participate in that somehow. I could feel what it is that they were feeling. And it, was this joyous reunion. And then I was even surprised more in that the two of them then turned to me, came over and embraced me. And then the three of us left and went into the light. And I have to tell you that when I entered into the light, it was this exquisite, wonderful place. It was like I was immersed in the love of the universe. I was there as we participated with each other. It's hard to explain, but I felt like I was me. I'm still me, but yet I am connected to everything that was in the universe. And in particular, where my focus was with Mary Fran and Nolan, the three of us. And we had a chance to be together, and we had a chance to express our love for each other, our affection for each other, and we had a chance to say our goodbyes. And if there is a proper way to say goodbye, if that hadn't happened because of the accident, I wasn't, I was at work, and they were in the car. So we had a chance then to reaffirm our relationship, and then a chance just to be together. We could be in each other's presence, in each other's company, and then it seemed complete. It wasn't like, time to say goodbye or something. It just, it felt like we were done. Like this was good. And the two of them then turned, and Mary Fran guided Nolan further into the light. And then I had a chance then to come back and be in my physical body. So that part of me that was with Mary Fran and Nolan, then I could come back and be in my physical body. So that's kind of like part one of the story. Part two of the story is that I was with Mary Fran and Nolan in the light, and we were affirming our relationship and saying our goodbyes, and yet I was also fully present in the room, sitting next to Willie, and was, fully conscious. I didn't have a word for it then. I do now. That it's called bilocation. I had a fully conscious self that was with Mary Fran and Nolan, and I had a fully conscious self that was in the room with all of the other relatives and friends. And I know this because as I'm sitting there on the windowsill next to Willie, it is like this inner force of ecstasy is just trying to break out of me. It's this force of love and compassion that is inside of me, and it's bursting out. And I know my face was had this. My countenance was of joy. It was really like I was fully present with the love of the universe, and my face showed it. And if anybody else in the room had looked at me, it would have been entirely inappropriate. And so I did the only thing I could think of, and that was to cover my face with my hands and just hold that posture until I could be reunited. I was fully with Mary Fran and Nolan, and I was fully in the room with all the relatives. And then I had a chance to combine and come back together again as I regained my composure. And once I was together, I could lower my hands and get off the windowsill and, participate with people in actively grieving for the loss of Nolan, who had just moments before, and also again for losing Mary Fran 6 days before that. So, I mean, there was lots of hugging and tears, and as we said our goodbyes. Okay, so that's part two. There's a part three to this also. So for this part, we have to flash forward about 15 years. And I'm at the University of St. Thomas, and I'm doing my doctoral work in educational leadership. And I have chosen to write about people that have had near-death experiences. And part of that, of course, is that I need to go find people to interview who have had a near-death experience. So I put the word out to all kinds of medical professionals and hospice workers. And as it turns out, Mary Fran's family, the sisters in the family, many of them were involved in healthcare. So I sent them all a note saying, this is what I'm looking for. Can you help me out? Well, one of Mary Fran's sisters, who really would like to be anonymous, so I'm just going to refer to her as the sister, wrote back to me and said, Scott, I had a near-death experience. Maybe you want to interview me. I would, sure, I'd love to do that. So it came to the appointed day, and we sat down in her living room, and I got all my gear ready and, got the microphone set up and the tape recorder going, and I asked her about her experience, and this is what she told me. She said that she was taking a new medication, and she had gone upstairs in her parents' home and lied down to take a nap. And the next thing that she knows, she is floating in a world of gray. And in this kind of cloud-like grayness, Mary Fran walks in. And Mary Fran sees her and puts her hands on her hips, and she goes, "You've got to go back, and you've got to go back now." To which the sister went, "Well, nice to see you too, Mary Fran." And Mary Fran then does it one better. She has her hands on her hip. Now this time she does a finger wag and is going, "You've got to go back, and you've got to go back now." And she said it with such force that it startled the sister, and she opened her eyes back in the physical world. And just as she did that, there was an EMT that was above her, and he was turning away, and he says to his partner, he says, "I've done everything I possibly can. We've lost her." The other EMT, looking over her shoulder, sees the sister open the eyes and goes, "Oh my gosh, are you kidding? She's back." And of course they grab her, they do their thing, they transport her off to the hospital, get her fixed up, and she's just fine. To this day, she's doing great. And so that was her story. And there was a couple other things I needed to do in the interview. We wrap it up, and I'm packing up my gear, and then I have this thought. So I looked at the sister and I said, "You know, back when Nolan made his transition, you were in the room, and something really unusual happened to me. I wonder if anything unusual happened to you too." And her eyes got just big as saucers. And taking that as a yes, I then grabbed my recording gear, set up the microphone, and hit the record button. And I said, "I tell you what, you tell me your story first, and then I'll tell you my story, and we'll compare notes." And she said, "Okay." This is what she told me. She said, "Scott, I remember this really well because I was standing on the other side of the bed. I was, in fact," he said, "I could see you. You were sitting on the windowsill next to Willie." I said, "That's right." And he said, when the heart monitor flattened, when Nolan flatlined, she said, "What I experienced was Mary Fran coming across the veil, scooping Nolan up out of his physical body. The two of them had this exquisite reunion. Then the two of them turned to me," meaning the sister, "they turned to me, embraced me, and then the three of us went to the light. We were there for a while, and then I came back to my physical body, and I could be again in the room with everybody who needed hugs and tears." I was dumbstruck. She had exactly the same experience that I did. And in fact, if you notice, she used almost exactly the same words that I used to describe what happened to me. So then in an instant, all of my concerns, all of my wondering if this had ever really happened, you know, I grew up in the Presbyterian church, and it, you know, there's nothing in the lexicon of the Presbyterian church that talks about, you know, the fact that you can witness somebody coming in and being there at the transition and seeing somebody go away, and at the moment of your greatest grief, you are in your greatest joy because you are with them as they are making their transition into the afterlife. I had wondered if I had just made that up, if that was something in my, because I was, you know, actively grieving. I just didn't know. But when the sister told me the story, all of that doubt went away. I knew that what I had experienced was real because somebody else had described it exactly the same way. And there's no way that she could have known what had happened to me. And so, in an instant, I was gifted with the knowledge that my experience had really happened, and that I had been with Mary Fran and Nolan as they made their very last transition into the afterlife and into this extraordinarily loving universe.